Well, first of all, I hope everyone's had a good Christmas, or if you're not celebrating, great couple of days. And obviously, Boxing Day, United get off to an okay start to sort of the festive period with a 2-2 draw versus Leicester. Honestly, wanted to come away with a win like everyone else did, and I'm disappointed we didn't quite get there because I think the main reason I think it let us down was our finishing. We just weren't clinical enough for me in this game, and that's really why we haven't come away with the victory. Now, in terms of from a tactical point of view, the main things I noticed, sort of first half, I think maybe the first 20 minutes or so, we had a little bit of trouble, especially in the wide areas, because Leicester were sort of they did some quite nice overlaps. So especially down the left where they got a lot of joy, because Victor Lindelof, as everyone knows, centre half, he's not normally going to be the one playing right back for us, and he did have a bit of trouble in the first half, especially because he was up against Harvey Barnes, obviously, and he struggled sometimes. Leicester got round him, and the danger really, weirdly, wasn't always when it was on Lindelof's side, but when Harvey Barnes got round Lindelof, and then Leicester were able to switch the play to the opposite side. Now, something I saw on the opposite side in particular was Albrighton here, and it's something we've seen against Luke Shaw quite a lot, because Luke Shaw's a good 1v1 defender. He likes to stick with his man, but sometimes that lets him get dragged out of position far too far. So we saw a few times Mark Albrighton on this side would drag Luke Shaw infield, and James Justin become, overlapping rapidly down that side, get the ball from Albrighton and play that into the box really early for Vardy. And that was a big threat because Vardy's good at making runs early, and obviously when he makes runs early, Harry Maguire can get caught out for his lack of pace. And just in general, if you make runs as a striker really early before the defender's expecting it, by the time they've turned round, you're in behind, and if that ball comes in early as well, you've got a really good goal scoring chance. So I think early on that was a big threat for Leicester, and it was lucky that United were able to sort of cope with it and not concede one early. In terms of the way United played, I think United were decent in the game. I think if I had to pick out areas where we struggled, it was when Leicester dropped back defensively into a 4-4-2. So they're out of possession shape, as we see quite often for a 4-2-3-1 in general, because there's not really much point in when you're sitting back defending out of possession, having sort of defensive lines consisting of one man, because it's not really doing anything. So a lot of teams that go with a 4-2-3-1 do tend to drop back into a 4-4-2 defensively. Indeed, United do it ourselves. So we see when we drop back defensively, it's rather than having sort of keeping the 4-2-3-1, leaving Martial up top on his own, Rashford and in this case Dan James would drop back into the sort of midfield line, and Fernandes would go up with Martial. So there's a little bit more resistance in terms of a line to make it a little bit harder to play through. Now, what we saw from United was the way we're building up, and I'm not sure it was best suited to this game. When Leicester dropped back into the 4-4-2, and they maybe sort of started to press us a bit, we had our players a little bit more advanced up the pitch, maybe in this sort of arrangement here. What we would do, what we normally do, is get the fullbacks. We try to push the fullbacks on, which does help, because then if you can't go through the middle, you've got the fullbacks on a different line, which is important because it means one player can't cover both the centre back and full back at the same time if they're pressing. We'll come back to that later. But what we did today, rather than that, was the full backs were, for the vast majority of the game, too flat. I think that's part of that will be because Lindelof's used to playing at centre back here, so he wasn't pushing on as much as he could have done. Another part of that will be his confidence. Obviously, he had a tough start to the game. Harvey Barnes was skinning him constantly, so obviously that's going to knock his confidence, and if you get your confidence knocked, naturally you're going to come a little bit closer to your other players, so there's less space for the opposition to exploit. So Lindelof found himself a bit close to Bailly at times, both in possession and out of possession. So that didn't really help us in our build-up play. Now, the other part of our build-up play that wasn't great was when if the Leicester front two were pressing a bit more like that, Leicester maybe a bit higher up the pitch. Often Fernandes was quite high as well. What we saw far too much was this situation here where Bailly and Maguire are one-on-one with Vardy and Maddison, and we really struggled to pass it through them at times, and that was really problematic. Littlefinger04 says, mate, our defence is the main issue. We actually could challenge for the league if we had half decent defenders. Yep, can't disagree. The goals we conceded today, shocking. We clearly do need to improve the defence. I think a defensive midfielder is really important, as you're about to see here, because we need someone who not just can do the defensive job, but also can distribute better, because a lot of our problems come from when we aren't able to pass through the opposition effectively. So we give them the ball, and then because we've given them the ball and we're in our sort of attacking shape, we're a little bit exposed. So what we had quite often was this here, where Maguire and Bailly up against Vardy and Maddison in that situation, and we couldn't find a way to progress the ball. If we go wide to Lindelof, because he was often far too flat, that's really easy for Harvey Barnes to come and put pressure on, and Lindelof got caught out a few times in that position when he received the ball there. What we want to see and what we needed to see quite often is Fred. Often Matic is really good at it. He's probably the best at it in the team. But we needed Fred or McTominay to drop in and make that a 3. But then, not good enough to make it a 3. The centre backs need to then push wider, whether it's Maguire on the left side or maybe Fred on the left side because he's left-footed. Doesn't really matter. Just take up the whole width of the pitch so there's more passing lanes open. But then we needed to push the fullbacks on, like we did so well against Everton. That's why we were so strong in possession against Everton in the first half. And then it'll pin back the Leicester wide midfielders, so it gives the centre-backs room to come forward. The other thing you need to do when you're doing that is you need your other midfield player here, McTominay, and it's probably his biggest weakness. And the reason we struggle quite a lot with build-up when he's playing is that he often stands in the shadow of one of these men here, in a place where he can't receive the ball from the defensive line. And that is really problematic because it means then our only progression, our only routes forwards are out to the fullbacks. Oh, don't know why the ball's gone bigger. But yeah, the only routes are out to the fullbacks or the centre-backs stepping forward with the ball themselves. Now, in terms of the centre-backs stepping forward with the ball themselves, that is really difficult and unlikely to happen when McTominay is in the cover shadow of one. Because because these two here can then be as far apart as they want and they can cover any man that gets the ball. Any of those three can be covered. Now, for the second United goal, what we saw was Scott McTominay learnt from, I don't know whether he learnt from it, whether it was by accident, whatever. But what we saw was McTominay stood in between. He picked up a position in between the two of these players. And that meant that rather than being able to spread out and press different men at a different time, they had to both come together because then, all of a sudden, the most dangerous pass is the one through the middle to McTominay because he's taking 2 Leicester players out of the game. So that forced the two of them in field. And then that meant Eric Bailly out here had a lot of space to run, carry the ball forwards, and pass it forwards to Edinson Cavani when he came on. And obviously from Cavani, that was played straight in behind to Bruno Fernandes, who put it in the back of the net. So the difference there was that little bit of better positioning from Scott McTominay. And now, Scott McTominay, is he a defensive midfield player? Let me know in the comments down below. But for me, he's not. He's a box-to-box player, as he showed against Leeds. He's fantastic at getting forward. He's a really good presence, really good at driving with the ball. His strength isn't sitting deep and dictating play, and he just doesn't know where to position himself. So yes, he'll be improving that with the coaching staff, I'm sure, but having him in this position is hurting our build-up at the moment. And look, yeah, maybe McTominay should be the one dropping into the back 3, and maybe Fred sits there instead. But I think they're using Fred to do that because he's left-footed and we don't have another left-footer in that position. But whatever it is, McTominay there at the moment is hurting our build-up. So we do need to get that sorted and see what we can do about that. Now, people are saying a lot about Dan James. I think for me, Dan James had a decent game. He just didn't get the space. I think for the majority of the game, United struggled to create space in the way we did against Everton. So against Everton, what happened was their sort of double pivot in the midfield, they were dragged deeper by Fernandes and Donny van de Beek, positioning themselves pretty much on the last man. And that gave Pogba in here a lot of space to dictate the play. And on this occasion, the Leicester double pivot weren't moving. So Ndidi and Tielemans, they weren't moving. They weren't getting dragged. So it gave us a little bit of a problem. And when you add to that the problems we were having playing the ball forward from defence, all it did was just give Leicester encouragement to squeeze up, and we struggled to cope with it at times. And when I say struggled to cope, sometimes we played ourselves into pressure and gave away chances. Other times we just weren't able to move the ball forwards and create chances for ourselves, which is equally frustrating. So I think what we need to see more of, I guess, is when we're under pressure, when the Leicester team was squeezing up, we need to see a lot more of, and we did see it at times during that first half, where United decided to go a bit more direct. And when you've got players like Rashford, Martial, Dan James, they're quick. You can go direct. But it's important then that when you do go direct from deep, obviously Lindelof's really good at those long balls over the top. I assume, Maguire can play them, we know. But we need to see it when that happens. Everyone pushes up, but then not only that, we need aggression from Fred and McTominay in the midfield here. We have to win that second ball. They have to squeeze up and go and win that. And what that will do eventually over time is, if you keep doing that and it's having some success, the Leicester defence, they'll get tired of constantly having to turn their back and chase backwards into areas. And then they'll sit a little bit deeper. And when they sit a little bit deeper, it opens up a gap between the defence and the midfield. And when that opens up a gap between the defence and midfield, there's space for Fernandes, there's space for Rashford to cut inside, there's space for Dan James to cut inside, or whoever's on the wings there. There's space for them all of a sudden in between the lines. And that's what we needed to do. Just change our approach to provoke a reaction, and then the reaction will allow us to play the way we want to play. So for me, that was frustrating, and I think just a little bit more intelligence from the lads in general, just a little bit more ability to adapt, ability to change things. And look, once again, when you're playing against a 4-4-2, it's basic things. Now, something I noticed with our pressing strategy at times was, and we've seen it a lot of times this season, we do try and sort of hem teams in, particularly when they go down one side. Now, against Leeds, what we did really well was that when they went down one side, rather than pressing the whole pitch, we did come across and press quite narrow. Now, I mean, this one's sort of personal preference for different coaches. Personally, I like this because it is quite difficult in general for teams to shift that ball from one side to the other, which is the only way to really expose a narrow press. And normally, by the time that ball's travelled all the way over there, the team can shift across. So I do like a narrow press in that sense. And what it does is it prevents you getting exposed by a ball down the line. And what we saw today was that oftentimes, especially when the ball was on Leicester's right-hand side here, Martial and Rashford would be the ones pressing the defence. Rashford came quite narrow at times, and then Luke Shaw would squeeze up really high on James Justin. Now that's fine when you win the ball back, and there are a couple of times where we did win the ball back, and Rashford had a good chance. I think Fernandes had a good chance from it, and yeah, great, that's fantastic. The pressure's working. However, you do leave yourselves a bit exposed because if Justin's able to play that ball in behind, then all of a sudden you've got a bit of a difficult situation for Harry Maguire here. Does he go across? Does he stay here? Does he hope Fred gets across to cover? And it leaves us in an awkward position. So I want to see maybe a little bit more thought put into that from the coaching staff. Maybe, rather than Luke Shaw pressing the fullback there, maybe Fred can be more aggressive. Fred can go up and push him. And then the defence is still intact. The back four is still intact as a unit. Because then, even then, McTominay can shift across. The back four can come across and be much more narrow. I think in general, that's another thing. When we lost possession in this game, I think we were a little bit too wide as a defence. We didn't come across and we weren't compact and narrow enough for whatever reason. It's just little things we need to work on like that. And I think let me know how you guys see it, but I think the coaching staff are seeing these things, are slowly starting to pick them up. And the way I see United at the moment is, rather than being a sort of team that have a tactical style, a set style like a Guardiola team, maybe a Jose Mourinho team in a sense as well, we're a team that has obviously a large squad of adaptable players. And the idea behind that is we don't play with a set team, a set style every week. There are some basic principles which we like to keep intact, like the quick counter-attacks, use of space in particular, the way that Rashford tries to get close to Anthony Martial, things like that. The basic principles we try to keep intact. But beyond that, the way we play for each game is dictated by how the opposition play, the way they want to play, the sort of strengths and weaknesses of their team. And United are getting better and better at that. And when you're setting up your team to play in that way, not only is it potentially better for individual one-off games, as we've seen, Solskjaer's fantastic at one-off games. He's beaten Guardiola 3 times last year. Obviously, the PSG results in the last couple of years. Solskjaer's brilliant at one-off games because he's able to spot weaknesses. But what takes a bit longer to come through is the player's ability to constantly adapt and constantly go from doing this sort of set of instructions one game to something completely different the next and be able to perform it effectively. And that comes with the maturity of the players. So obviously it's a young team. As the players get older and more mature, they get more and more used to doing these sorts of things, they'll become better and better at it. And not only that, because rather than just putting everything into one particular tactical style, one particular set of instructions, which as we've seen with Mourinho, as we're seeing now with Guardiola, it can become stale. The players can burn out from listening to the same thing over and over. It's frustrating for them. If instead you set up like this, where you maybe give them a different challenge every week, they're constantly on their toes, and you're relying more on their core skills and their ability to adapt to whatever's in front of them on the pitch than necessarily just telling them, you do this every week, you do the same thing. So look at Rodri and Guardiola's system the last couple of years. He's been doing the same thing every week, for example. Whereas McTominay and Fred, they have different roles every week. Maybe by doing this, we're able to keep the players interested for longer, more of a challenge. We're able to stop them burning out. And maybe Ole will be able to build a dynasty for himself. He'll be able to build a bit of success over a longer period, rather than just a Mourinho or Guardiola style sort of 3-year push at the title, a little run, see what they can do. And if it doesn't happen by then the players will be burnt out, frustrated, and that's it. Maybe this is the way to go. Maybe that sort of tactical era is coming to an end, and, well, I say tactical era, the era of hyper-focus on a particular tactic is coming to an end. I think in terms of team performance, maybe maximum points in a Premier League season, maybe there's a higher ceiling if you focus on a particular tactical style and get it perfect, like Guardiola's Centurion season. But with this sort of thing, maybe United can consistently challenge every season for the title. So maybe that's something to consider. Maybe Ole is building things in a different way, which, I mean, at times we've criticised him for not having a system, not having a style of play. But maybe he's building his team from the ground up in a different fashion to the way the other managers build it from the top down, from a particular tactic imposed on the players. So maybe this works out in a different way, and maybe Ole Gunnar Solskjaer actually ends up having a bit of a dynasty at United. So obviously that's a bit of a monologue from me where I see the team going. Hope you've had a great Christmas, everyone. Hope you had a good Boxing Day. Decent result, a point against Leicester. I would have liked it to be 3, and to be honest, the main reason it's not is we didn't take our chances. We weren't clinical enough, especially that one-on-one for Rashford. He likes that technique of going across goal, but he's hit it at a very savable height, and he needs to work on his technique in that. I'd like to see him. It's difficult to explain, but I'd like to see him use a slightly different way of striking the ball. So maybe he goes for that. Maybe he works that out in training. Hopefully. But until next time, I think next game's Wolves on Tuesday. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and goodbye. Olayomi says hello, and just before I go, shout out to you. Obviously, a great supporter of the channel. And shout out to anyone else. Please do share the channel. Drop a like. If you're not subscribed, get subscribed. And yeah, until Tuesday, thanks very much.